Hey, Jason.
Hi. So it's been so long since Dennis last preached, he kind of forgot how. And so he asked me to come help him.
Okay, help. Pearl of Great Price is a passage I've been struggling with for about 2 months. Playing with it and reading a lot of commentaries about it. It's just this short, pithy little saying, Pearl of Great Price. It reminded me of a quote from a German quantum theorist who won a Nobel Prize, Max Planck, who said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Part of the challenge Jesus confronted is people knew exactly what it was he was going to say and what he was going to do. And they were wrong. But what they knew got in the way. It's as if their knowledge made Jesus invisible, made his words hard to discern, so that they could listen to what he had to say and not hear him. They could see what he was doing and not see it. They could look but not see. They could learn something but not understand. It's as if the parables that you would think were going to explain things had the opposite effect. They instead shrouded things, made it hard to understand. The story is interesting in that the people who listened to hear Jesus never guessed in the beginning that he was the pearl of great price. That they thought he was explaining something over there, but he was instead telling them about something happening directly to them. There's this fascinating thing that Jesus isn't doing a flannel graph where he has parts of the kingdom that he's displaying for you, and you could say, oh, this is that, and this is that. But he's instead trying to talk in a way that will create an experience inside of you, and that your experience, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, becomes part of his story. That he's provoking you in some way. He's getting you to come out of hiding so that you can be engaged in this story. Somebody did that with me, and I thought I'd share the technique they used with me so that you could know the same thing. You ready? Okay, I need you to stand up for those whose bodies are able and can move. Those who are awake, nudge the person next to you if you need to. So what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute is I'm going to ask you to take your left finger and keep your feet planted on the ground, and you're going to turn that way.
He's been practicing this all week.
Is there anybody in the room not standing? Kind of above it all, aren't you? Yeah. So I'm just going to explains everything. So I'm going to have you just go, turn, and just kind of go as far as you can, and then point at something so you remember it. When you're ready, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, come back. You know what you pointed at? Very good. Now I want you to relax a minute, and now I want you to imagine that you're going to go like this much further than you did that time. That your body's going to move this much further, and it's going to be easier than it was when you did it last time. You won't have trouble moving. It's going to be as if your body relaxes a little bit. Now I want you to imagine it's going to be this much further. That when you turn this next time, you're going to be able to go this much further than you went that time. You ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Back. Anybody go further? Isn't that kind of a remarkable thing? You went as far as you thought you could, but then you did more. That's kind of what Jesus is doing. He's creating a possibility for people they didn't know existed. And it's his presence that makes things possible you didn't know could happen. The person who helped teach me this also did an experiment with me. They said, Dennis, I want you to imagine that I have in my hand a fresh, gorgeous sunshine yellow lemon. And I want you to imagine that I have a knife and I'm cutting the lemon in half. And when I do, it's such a juicy lemon that its juices are just flowing out of my fingers. Then I want you to imagine that I've taken the knife and I've cut it the other way in half so that I have 4 wedges in my hand and there's juice all over the floor. Then I want you to imagine that I've taken one of the wedges of the lemon and I bite. And then he said, Dennis, do you have like extra saliva in your mouth right now? I said, yeah, you made me bite a lemon. And he said, you didn't actually bite a lemon. You just ran an experiment in your head, and your whole body responded. You can be seated.
It's a really stupid way to cut a lemon, though. Like, right in your hand? It's like, away from yourself.
So that's like your whole way you operate. You sit on the sidelines. You're like the Muppet characters that are watching. You know, the two old men.
That's what I aspire to.
The two old men that are sitting back here and looking down. That's you. So it is possible that there are things possible for you that you miss because of things you already know, things you presume, things you think you are great at can be the very thing that stops you from noticing something great right in front of you. When I was 15 years old, I decided that the explanation for the world that Christianity gave, that the church gave, was just silliness and fantasy, something that was made up to make people feel good so that they had the comfort of a daddy in the sky that would take care of them. But it had no basis in reality, that science had nothing to do with it, culture had nothing to do with it, society it just didn't match for me. By the time I was 17, I was so good at being convinced that Christianity's explanations were inadequate, that I was proud of my newfound faith in not having faith. At the time, I was dating a woman who went through a profound transformation. One evening on a date, I noticed that she seemed different to me. Her skin seemed to glow, the kind of radiance that comes from having just calm, non-anxious presence, for her being clear about who she was and what she wanted. And when I saw this glow, I thought it was because of me.
Like one date with you and...
Same thing happened to you, right? Yeah. So what she told me was she had no idea what was going on, but I knew that something was different. The countenance she possessed, the calmness she had, the sense of clarity and centeredness. And so I badgered her for a month. She wouldn't answer my questions. And after a month, she said, God has entered my life in a way that wasn't there before. And it's made all the difference. Now, before I was able to dismiss this Christianity, that was a set of explanations, some words to explain the world. I could come up with other words to explain the world. What she found was this reorientation of her very being, that something at the core of her locked in, went bam, and that I couldn't explain. And it created for me a search to find out what that was. And the search lasted for almost 2 years before I found the pearl of great price. I found this Jesus Christ, found God's presence in Christ. I found myself in God's presence, and God's presence with me. It didn't give me an explanation. I tried to find it. I tried to find more words, but the first thing it gave me was this utter joy. That same kind of radiance. Not because I'd worked anything out, but it was just a gift. How about you?
Well, that just made me think. I didn't say this in the last hour. I literally just thought of this.
Mm-hmm.
So the poet Mary Carr, when she became a Christian, she writes about how her elitist writer friends kind of criticized her and said, that she needed a crutch. She must have needed a crutch.
Right.
And
That's one of the lines I would have used.
Yeah, and her response was, well, if you know your leg is broken, there's nothing wrong with having a crutch. It makes perfect sense. So for me, like the thing about parables is they're not allegories. And so there's no proper way to say, well, the pearl equals this, the merchant equals this. Mm-hmm. They're more of a whole. And this parable is part of a series of parables in the middle of Matthew. And so it's really one parable Jesus is telling with this kind of rat-a-tat repetition of parables. But for me, it wasn't discovering that Christ is the pearl of great price. It was discovering that because of Christ, I'm the pearl of great price. That when I was about 17, having never participated or entered a church before, and going against my will on a Christmas Eve, and hearing the worst sermon I've ever heard in my life, with really cheesy jokes at the beginning and like turn to your neighbor and get up, kinetic distractions while the pastor tried to come up with a sermon.
What a cheap trick.
He was an old, like, has-been at that point.
And it was the worst sermon you had ever heard.
Oh my gosh, it was. I've heard worse since then, but but that was the beginning of a year or more, like hearing this, like the message of grace, that Christ is like the merchant who discovers in us something that's precious. Because, a pearl is the product of an oyster, which in the context of Jesus' Bible is an unclean food, which, in the parable is a way of saying that we're sinners, and yet despite who we are and what we do, Christ is able to discern something precious about us.
I like the image
and something, Christ is willing to sell everything, give up everything for. And in that message of value, when I didn't value myself, elicited joy in me.
I was thinking of the process of making the pearl is to take that irritant, that incredible, sinful, irritating, arrogant, snarky presence, and covering it with grace, making it precious. I hadn't thought of that before.
I'm glad I helped you.
Yeah.
Again.
Part of what makes a church work is not coming up with a list of things that people ought to do to earn the kingdom, that if we do all of these things, we eventually will get the joy. But it is instead that there's this moment of recognition, like when I saw Sharon had changed, when Sharon knew that she was in the presence of God, when it happened for me, that's when the joy happened. It was this reorientation, like selling everything because you found the pearl, not so that you could, the pearl is a gift, you've discovered it, and it's surprising. That experience of surprise is like the lemon in your mouth, the moving of your arm, that you are surprised that God has given you joy. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Surprised by Joy. It's that same experience. So when a church isn't just giving the world a new set of rules to live by, but it is being true to this gift of grace that's available. I think it's what the world's really looking for. It's what I was looking for, but I didn't know how to name it. I had all my own words to describe what that joy would be like, and I just missed it when it was right in front of me. And I think the world sometimes is out looking for a whole lot of things, and it's not that the people are bad, though some are bad. It's that they don't know where that joy can best be found. And they need a community that kind of orients everything it does around that story, that message.
Yeah, no, I think, and we're not explicit enough that what we do in worship is the center of everything else we do as church, that it's more important because this is where we orient ourselves around that message of joy and celebrate it. And from that, other stuff flows. But you don't get the joy that going the opposite direction. Like that's important, I think.
It's not that you get everything right. Then once you're perfect, you can have joy, right? That the coating of the pearl starts, and that's enough. Yeah. One of my joys of the last 13 years has been working with you after you found the faith, where I was the preacher at that church that had the terrible sermon.
You all knew that, right? It wasn't like
well, not
coded
everybody.
language.
We have new people all the time. You can't talk in code. This is going to be much easier than I thought. So I got word from the Methodist bishop, the person who oversees the state of Virginia, and he said that this June, Jason will be moving to another congregation to be the pastor of another church. And so I wanted, as soon as I knew that we knew that you know. There is a committee in the church that every January fills out a form about what they would prefer happens with the pastors of the church. They would stay and be in ministry with you, or they would move on, that the time had come for them to move and be in ministry with somebody else. The committee in our church filled out the form and said they wanted both me and Jason to stay. Jason filled out a similar form to give to the bishop and said that he wished to stay. I filled out a similar form and said I wanted Jason to stay. The needs of the conference this year have swamped what we wanted, and they have now chosen Jason to serve in another congregation. There's a unique opportunity that allows Jason to stay in Northern Virginia, be near his doctors, his kids to be in a good school system, and for Allie to be near her job as a lawyer in Bethesda. It's an opportunity that won't be open. Once it's filled, that pastor position will be closed for probably the next 10 years. It's kind of a unique opportunity for us to have had Jason be with us for 13 years. Most associates last 3 to 4. So 13 is an unusually rich, good thing for us. But in my mind, it was not nearly long enough. I thought we both could retire together here. I will be coming back, and I will be spending the next month interviewing candidates for the associate's position. There are out of 1,000 ministers in Virginia, about 25 have self-selected and said they would like to be an associate someplace. So I will be interviewing them. I will submit my request to the bishop, and then in April I will hear who it is that will be coming. They will come on board July 1, and there will be a great opportunity to meet them. Between now and then, Jason will be part of the congregation, and we'll be having fun together, and I want to make the next 4 months as good for you and your family as we possibly can. Part of that is Jason's writing a second book, and I've asked him to take the month of March off because he works so hard here that he can spend his time writing that book. He may be here as liturgist, but you won't see him on Sundays. And then April and May and June, he'll be here. We'll have a chance to have a party for him and a roast and a chance to say goodbye. We don't need to say goodbye today because we still have 4 months to go. But I wanted you to know. So tell me how you're doing. How's Allie and the boys, and how's all this for you guys?
So I don't do feelings well, especially so just know that. I mean, so what, most of the, so what you all don't see is that every year this anxiety about getting moved is a part of my life and a part of our leadership's life. And so, I thought it was happening the last 2 years. And so when I got called last week, in spite of that, it just didn't feel real at first. And what it reminded me of was telling you when I was sick, which was also in February. So
almost exactly.
I don't do February as well either. And so now, we're just sad to be leaving. So we've been here a long time. This is the only church my kids have known. I know a lot of you really well, and so we're just sad. We're relieved to just have resolution, and we're relieved to not have to do this again next year, unless it goes really bad.
The odds of that are pretty high. It took this congregation 4 years before they liked you. So,
and I'm worried what it will do to this church to have an associate pastor who takes you seriously.
So some prayers are being answered.
Complete culture change. And just curious about what's next. The boys are anxious.
Yeah, new schools, everything changes. Yeah, new house. And it's odd in our system that you don't even get to pick your house, but there's a parsonage, so you have to kind of adjust to its room structure and where everybody's going to be and the neighborhood you're going to be in. Yeah. Our prayers will be with you as you're getting ready for the change. We don't want you there too fast. We want to hold on to you as long as we can. But then you'll be in our prayers that all the good you've done here, you'll do with other people. And there'll be a new chapter here, and it's going to be interesting for me and exciting to see how Aldersgate begins writing that next chapter. Because that pearl of great price is why we're here. Even though we're all fanboys of Jason. And that won't change when you leave. That connection will still be we'll still have that. but we also will be writing the next chapter. Like, I wouldn't want all the work you've done for 13 years to be lost simply because you're leaving. But there's something more substantial you've created that has a life and kind of legs and sustains this congregation for a long time. That's all I got.
I don't have anything else either.
So, who is going to, there's somebody from the leadership team here. Leah? Hi, Leah. You want to come up and kind of give the leadership team's take or anything you need to say to us? There's about 15 people in the congregation that serve on a leadership team. They meet once a month, and they're the group that voted for Jason to come back.
Good morning, everyone.
Let me make sure I've got you on. You're on.
I am. Thank you, Dennis. Good morning. It's always nice to see you. The leadership team has been processing this information since we met on Tuesday, and we were told by Jason and Dennis that the bishop has identified Jason for a leadership role at a church in Northern Virginia. We're thrilled for the opportunity that this gives to Jason to take his many gifts to another church and to lead and grow another congregation in many of the ways that he has done for us. We are so grateful for everything that Jason and Dennis have done for us as, I think, one of the best teams the Virginia Conference has to offer. And we'll spend the next 4 months celebrating Jason's many wonderful works here and giving him a great send-off to his next leadership role. So I hope you'll join me in thanking the two of them for pooling together this information in a very short period of time for you this Sunday, and celebrating with us over the next 4 months as we give Jason the best send-off Aldersgate can give. Thank you so much for listening this morning.
I don't do secrets. I like everything to be transparent. The place he's going, I've been asked not to tell you by the bishop because the pastor who is serving that place has not told his congregation yet that he is moving. So they'll be as surprised as you are. And he doesn't plan on telling his congregation until the 25th of March. And I just didn't want to wait. So the negotiation I got was I could say that Jason was going, and we'll announce where he's going once that pastor tells their congregation. Then everybody will know everything.
So we're done?